A trained horse for special missions and a man marked by destiny become the last line of defense against an invisible danger. When everything seems lost, what happens leaves everyone speechless. The heart monitor emitted its steady beeps as John Thompson opened his eyes for the first time after the incident. The darkness that enveloped him at that moment was not temporary, as he had initially hoped. The doctor, with a deep and compassionate voice, confirmed what his heart already sensed. The light had gone out forever in his life. John, a titan of the business world, accustomed to commanding an empire with the precision of a maestro, now faced the greatest challenge of his existence. The walls of the hospital room, which he could not see but felt suffocating around him, seemed to mock his new condition. The man who once controlled every aspect of his life with meticulous attention to detail now had to rely on others for the most basic tasks. Anna, his wife, remained by his side, holding his hand with a strength that conveyed more than simple support. It was an anchor amidst the storm brewing in his mind. Their children, Claire and Matthew, took turns at the hospital, their voices carrying a tone of concern that John could discern, even as they tried to mask it. "We need to talk about what we'll do now," Anna said softly, on a particularly quiet afternoon. "We can't stay in the city, not under the current circumstances." John knew she was right. The attempt on his life had made it clear that staying there would be an unnecessary risk. His mind, still as sharp as ever, began working through the possibilities. It was then that the memory of Serene Hill Ranch emerged like a beacon in the darkness. "Grandpa's ranch," Matthew commented when John mentioned the idea. "That place is amazing, Dad. Isolated, peaceful, perfect for starting over." The property in Colorado, inherited from his grandfather, had been maintained more for sentimental value than any real interest in the location. Now, that refuge in the countryside presented itself as the best option for their new reality. The decision was made with the same speed with which John used to close his most important deals. In less than 2 weeks after being discharged, the family was already on their way to Serene Hill. The journey was long and silent, each mile traveled marking not only the physical distance from the city, but also the detachment from everything John had built over decades. Arriving at the ranch was a mix of emotions. The fresh morning air of Colorado, filled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and damp earth, filled his lungs like an old memory. John might not have been able to see the property, but his other senses began to awaken in a way he had never experienced before. The first days were a true test of patience and humility. Every step was a challenge, every gesture a potential frustration. The spilled coffee at breakfast, the stumbles over the furniture carefully arranged by Anna, the feeling of helplessness when needing help for tasks he once performed without thinking, all of it weighed on his pride like lead. Claire, always practical, began marking the paths around the house with different textures on the floor, creating a kind of tactile map for her father. Matthew dedicated himself to describing every detail of the property, turning images into words that painted pictures in John's mind. Anna, in turn, maintained a strict routine, ensuring that every object remained in its proper place. But it was during the nights that the real battle took place. Alone with his thoughts, John relived his previous life in an endless loop. The board meetings, the international negotiations, the respect his name carried in business circles, all of it now seemed to belong to another life, a distant reality that dissolved like smoke between his fingers. It was on one of those sleepless nights that John first heard the distant whinny that would change his life. The sound, coming from the old stables on the property, carried a strength and a melancholy that seemed to echo his own feelings. That moment, even without knowing it, fate began weaving the threads that would tie his story to that of an extraordinary animal. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from, and stay tuned. The sound of tires on the dirt road announced Charles's arrival on a particularly humid morning. The former police officer, a longtime friend of John's, had promised a visit, but what he brought with him that day would completely change the course of events at Serene Hill. "John, my friend," Charles's deep voice echoed across the yard. "I've brought something that will interest you." The sound of hooves striking the ground firmly made John tilt his head, curious. His ears, now much more attuned to every sound, nuance, caught the rhythmic movement of a large animal approaching. "This is Storm," Charles announced with a tone of pride in his voice. "One of the best horses I've ever known in my entire career. He's not an ordinary animal, John. He was trained for special operations, has a unique sensitivity, and an intelligence that will surprise you." John remained silent, processing the information. His fingers tapped nervously on the cane that had become his constant companion in recent weeks. Anna, who watched the scene from the porch, noticed the tension in her husband's shoulders. "Charles," John finally spoke, his voice carrying a mix of irritation and disbelief, "do you really think I'm in any condition to ride? I can barely walk around the house without knocking something over." The sound of hooves grew closer, and John felt the warmth of the animal near him. A gentle breath on his face took him by surprise. Storm had approached on his own, as if wanting to introduce himself. "It's not about riding right now," Charles explained patiently. "It's about reconnection, John, about reclaiming your independence. Storm isn't just a horse, he's a trained partner, here to guide and build trust." Claire, who had joined the group, let out an admiring exclamation as she saw the majestic stature of the animal. "Dad, he's incredible. His coat is as black as coal, and he has such an elegant presence." John hesitantly reached out his hand, and Storm gently pressed his muzzle into his palm. The contact sparked a wave of unexpected emotions. The soft texture of the fur, the vital warmth radiating from the animal, the rhythmic breathing, it all created an immediate and profound connection. In the days that followed, John spent more and more time in the stables. At first, just talking to Storm, getting familiar with his presence. The horse showed extraordinary patience, staying close, as if understanding the importance of this adjustment process. Matthew, excited about the new presence on the ranch, began researching the history of horses trained for special tasks. "It's amazing, Dad," he shared his findings during dinner. "These animals develop an almost supernatural awareness of their surroundings and the people around them." It was Anna who first noticed the subtle changes in her husband's behavior. His posture, once hunched under the weight of his new condition, began to straighten. The constant irritation gave way to a calm thoughtfulness. The sleepless nights became less frequent. One morning, without warning, John asked to be taken to the riding arena. The silence that followed was broken only by Storm's soft whinny, as if the animal approved of the decision. "Are you sure, Dad?" Claire asked, concern evident in her voice. "Absolutely," John replied with a firmness he hadn't shown in a long time. "Storm has been more than a gift. He's been a daily lesson in trust and overcoming. It's time to take the next step." With the help of Charles, who had returned especially for this moment, John was positioned beside Storm. His hands moved over the animal's body, memorizing every detail, creating a mental map of its structure. The horse remained perfectly still, as if understanding the importance of the moment. "Remember," Charles instructed, "Storm has been trained to respond to subtle commands. He'll sense your intentions before you even fully express them. The point isn't for you to guide him, but for you both to guide each other." When John finally mounted, a long-forgotten feeling washed over him. Freedom. There, on Storm's back, the darkness that surrounded him seemed less oppressive. The world, once limited by the reach of his cane, expanded with every step the animal took. The dawn at Serene Hill brought a completely new routine for John. The days that once began with reading financial reports and international conferences now started with the sound of Storm's hooves in the stable, eager for the morning meeting with his new companion. The connection between man and animal grew in surprising ways. Storm showed extraordinary sensitivity to John's needs, adjusting his pace according to the terrain and stopping instinctively before any obstacle. It was as if the horse had developed a sixth sense to compensate for his rider's lack of sight. "It's amazing," Claire remarked one morning, watching her father and Storm make their way around the perimeter of the ranch. "Dad is moving with a confidence we haven't seen since, well, you know." Anna, who was beside her hanging clothes on the line, smiled in agreement. The transformation was visible. John was once again carrying that aura of security that had always defined him, even if in a different way now. The riding sessions progressed quickly. What began with simple walks around the arena turned into increasingly longer rides across the property. John discovered that he could see the ranch through Storm. The horse had a unique way of communicating every change in the terrain, every curve in the path, every approach to fences or gates. "It's like he's my eyes," John explained to Matthew. During one of their rides, "When Storm adjusts his pace or slightly moves his head, I know exactly what to expect from the terrain ahead. It's a language of our own that we've developed." The ranch, which initially seemed like a forced exile, was beginning to take on the air of a private paradise. The sounds of birds in the morning, the scent of wildflowers, the gentle breeze blowing through the trees, all of this composed a sensory symphony that John had never noticed in his previous life. Charles, who visited regularly to check on his friend's progress, couldn't hide his satisfaction. "I knew Storm would be perfect for you," he commented during lunch. "He's not just a trained animal, he's a true partner. In the police force, he demonstrated a unique ability to assess situations and protect his companions." Charles's words sparked John's curiosity. "What do you mean, protect?" "Storm has a special instinct for sensing changes in the environment," Charles explained. "He was trained to identify risky situations before they fully manifested. That's what made him so valuable in special operations." That information echoed in John's mind. In the days that followed, he began paying closer attention to Storm's reactions during their rides. The horse truly seemed to have a heightened awareness of everything happening around him, reacting to the slightest unusual sound or movement. One afternoon, during one of their usual routes, something different happened. Storm stopped abruptly, his ears twitching in alert. John, who had already learned to trust the animal's instincts, remained silent, trying to discern what had caused the reaction. "What is it, buddy?" he whispered, stroking the horse's neck. Storm remained still for a few moments, as if listening to something beyond the reach of human senses, before resuming his path, albeit at a more cautious pace. That evening, during dinner, John shared the incident with the family. It might have been nothing, he pondered, but Storm had never reacted like that before. "Maybe some wild animal," suggested Matthew, always practical in his assessments. "Just yesterday, I saw capybara tracks near the creek." Anna, however, seemed less convinced. In recent days, she herself had noticed some subtle changes on the property, small details that, on their own, seemed insignificant, but were beginning to form an intriguing pattern in her mind. "John," she began hesitantly, "do you remember that strange noise we heard the night before last? It sounded like a motorcycle engine, but when I went to check, there was nothing on the road." Claire, who had been focused on her plate until then, looked up. "I've also noticed some unusual things," she admitted. "Yesterday, when I went to the back fence to photograph the sunset, I saw tire marks that weren't from our vehicles." John absorbed this information in silence. His mind, trained by years of complex negotiations, began to process every detail, every small clue. Storm had sensed something, and now his family confirmed that there was more happening at Serene Hill than met the eye. The routine at Serene Hill began to change subtly in the following weeks. Anna started locking the doors earlier, a habit she had never had before. Matthew installed motion sensors in strategic points around the property, claiming it was just a precaution. Claire began taking her photography walks, always accompanied by one of the ranch dogs. John, even without being able to see, felt the growing tension in the air. His other senses, already heightened by his lack of vision, picked up on the changes in his family's behavior. Conversations during dinner became more restrained, as if everyone was avoiding mentioning something important. Storm also showed signs of increasing restlessness. The horse, normally calm and methodical in his movements, began to develop a new behavior. During rides, he would often stop, his ears constantly moving as if tracking distant sounds. "There's something different about him," John commented to Charles during one of his regular visits. "It's like Storm is always on alert." Charles, who knew the animal's temperament well, furrowed his brow. He was trained to recognize patterns of suspicious behavior. If Storm is agitated, we should pay attention. It was on a particularly hot afternoon that the first concrete incident occurred. Claire was in her room, organizing her recent photographs of the ranch, when she noticed something strange in one of the images. In the sunset photo, taken near the back fence, there was a shadow that shouldn't have been there. A human silhouette, partially hidden among the trees. "Dad," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "I think we need to talk." John was in the office, his fingers gliding over the Braille documents he had started studying as part of his adaptation. "What is it, daughter?" Claire hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Remember when I mentioned the different tire marks? Well, I don't think they were just random marks. I've been photographing the property every day, and there are signs that someone has been watching the ranch." At that moment, as if to confirm Claire's suspicions, Storm let out a sharp whinny from the stable. It was a sound unlike any they had heard before, a warning. Anna, who was in the kitchen, quickly joined them. "John, I think we can't ignore these signs any longer. Over the past few days, I've found objects out of place, footprints where there shouldn't be any, and the dogs have been barking at nothing during the night." Matthew, who had just returned from inspecting the fences, entered the office breathless. "You need to see this," he said before quickly correcting himself. "Sorry, Dad, I found something concerning. There are fresh marks from heavy vehicles near the creek, and some of the sensors I installed have been deactivated." John absorbed every word in silence, his mind processing the information. Years of experience in business had taught him to recognize when a situation required immediate action. "Charles needs to know about this," he decided, reaching for the phone. "And we need to tighten our security." As John made the call, a familiar sound caught his attention, the rhythmic beating of Storm's hooves on the stable floor. It was a pattern he had learned to recognize over the past few weeks, an unintentional code the horse had developed to communicate unease. "There's one more thing," Matthew added, his voice lower now. "Early this morning, a man showed up at the main gate. He said he was interested in buying horses, but his questions were strange. He wanted to know about our routine, how many people live here, what time we usually leave." Anna felt a shiver run down her spine. "Why didn't you tell us this earlier?" "Because he seemed normal at the time," Matthew replied. But now, putting it all together, John stood up from his chair, his posture radiating a determination he hadn't shown in a long time. "Claire, I want you to scan all the photos you've taken of the property over the last few days. Matthew, make a map marking all the spots where you found suspicious signs. Anna, reach out to the neighbors. We need to know if they've noticed anything unusual." As the family sprang into action, John confidently walked to the window, guided by the sound of Storm's hooves. The horse continued its rhythmic alert, as if trying to communicate something beyond mere restlessness. "You knew all along, didn't you, buddy?" John murmured to himself. "You've been trying to warn us from the start." Charles's arrival at the ranch the next day brought not only his experienced support, but also valuable information. The former police officer, after examining Claire's photographs and Matthew's records, confirmed the family's suspicions. Serene Hill was being systematically watched. "These marks aren't from casual onlookers," Charles explained, analyzing the images spread across the kitchen table. "There's a pattern here. Someone is studying the property, mapping routines, looking for weak points." Anna, who was serving coffee to everyone, let out a worried sigh. "But why? Serene Hill is just a ranch in the countryside. What could anyone possibly want here?" John, seated at the head of the table, wore a thoughtful expression. His fingers drummed on the wooden surface, an old habit from the days when he needed to make important business decisions. "Maybe the ranch isn't the target," he pondered. "Maybe it's something more." Before he could elaborate, the sound of an approaching vehicle caught everyone's attention. Storm, in the nearby stable, let out a warning whinny, a sound John had learned to recognize as a sign of danger. "It's a pickup truck," Matthew said, looking out the window. "I've never seen that vehicle around here before." A tall man, wearing a leather jacket despite the heat, stepped out of the vehicle. His stride was confident, as if he knew the place well, even though it was apparently his first visit. Claire, discreetly, picked up her camera and began photographing the stranger's approach. "Good morning," the man's voice boomed, falsely friendly. "Sorry to drop by unannounced. I'm Richard Miller, looking to buy some good horses. I heard you have some quality animals here." Charles and John exchanged a silent glance, or rather, Charles watched as John gave a slight nod, a gesture they had developed for discreet communication. "I'm Charles, the family's consultant," the former police officer introduced himself, strategically positioning himself between the visitor and the house entrance. "Do you have experience with horses, Mr. Miller?" The man smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Oh yes, plenty, especially with horses. Special. I heard you have a particularly interesting specimen here." John felt his heart race. The man knew about Storm, but how? The horse's presence on the ranch wasn't public knowledge. "Our horses are not for sale," John replied, standing up with the dignity that characterized him. "I appreciate your interest, but I suggest you look for other breeders in the area." Richard Miller didn't move. His eyes scanned the property with meticulous attention, lingering on every detail, every entrance, every window. "I see. But perhaps we can negotiate. I have a particular interest in horses with specific training." The air grew thick with unspoken tension. Storm, still in the stable, began to paw the ground in a rhythmic pattern that John recognized as his highest alert signal. "As I said," John repeated firmly, "we are not interested in selling. Matthew can escort you to the exit." The visitor hesitated for a moment longer, his gaze now fixed in the direction of the stable. Of course, but you know, sometimes things change. People change their minds when circumstances shift." The veiled threat didn't go unnoticed by anyone. Charles stepped forward, his posture revealing years of police training. "I must insist that you leave now, Mr. Miller." Mendes. When the sound of the pickup truck finally faded on the road, Anna closed all the doors and windows, her hands trembling slightly. Claire revealed that she had managed to photograph not only the man, but also the license plate of his vehicle. "That wasn't a casual visit," concluded Charles, his expression serious. "He came to assess the situation, test our defenses, and more importantly, he knows about Storm." John stood up and with steady steps headed to the stable. The horse calmed immediately in his presence, nuzzling his shoulder in a gesture of camaraderie. "We need to find out who this Richard Miller really is," said John, stroking Storm's neck. "And more importantly, we need to figure out how he found out about you, my friend." Charles was already on the phone, reaching out to his old police contacts. Claire organized the photos she had taken, searching for any detail that might be useful. Matthew checked the motion sensors, planning to install more security equipment. Anna watched everything with growing concern. The ranch, which was supposed to be her peaceful refuge, was turning into something different. But one thing was certain: they wouldn't allow anyone to threaten the safety they had built there. John, still in the stable, noticed a change in Storm's behavior. The horse was more alert, more protective. It was as if the animal understood the gravity of the situation and was preparing for what was to come. The days following Richard Miller's visit were filled with intense activity at Serene Hill. Charles, using his contacts, discovered that the name provided by the visitor was fake. No Richard Miller matched the man's description or was registered as a horse trader in the area. "We need to prepare," declared Charles during a family meeting on the porch. "We can no longer treat this as a coincidence or paranoia. Someone is specifically interested in Storm, and they won't give up easily." John, sitting in his favorite chair, absorbed every word with focus. His years in the business world had taught him to recognize when a situation required extraordinary measures. "Claire," he called, "I want you to document every inch of this property. Photograph everything, especially the most remote areas. Matthew, keep working on installing the sensors. But now I want something more. We need cameras in strategic points." Anna, who had remained silent until then, spoke up. "John, maybe we should consider leaving here for a while." "We could stay in town?" "No," John interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "Serene Hill isn't just a hideout for us. It's our home now. And more importantly, it's the only place where I can truly be independent, thanks to Storm." As if responding to his name, the horse neighed softly from the nearby stable. In recent days, the animal had shown even greater vigilance, refusing to stray too far from the main house, especially at night. Claire, who had spent hours studying her recent photographs, made an interesting observation. "You know what's curious? Storm started changing his behavior days before that man's visit. It's like he knew something was about to happen." "Doesn't surprise me," commented Charles. During his training, Storm showed an extraordinary ability to anticipate situations. It was like he could read people's intentions before they even acted. John smiled, reaching out toward the sound of his companion's hooves. "That's why we need to trust him now more than ever. Storm isn't just my eyes, he's our early warning system." The security measures were quickly implemented. Matthew, with Charles's help, installed a complex system of cameras and sensors. Claire mapped every inch of the property, creating a detailed archive of images that would allow them to identify any changes in the environment. Anna, though still worried, channeled her energy into reinforcing the house's security. All the locks were replaced, and a new lighting system was installed, eliminating dark spots around the property. "There's one more thing," said Charles. One afternoon, as he supervised the installation of the last cameras, "I reached out to some friends in the area. They agreed to form a surveillance network. Any suspicious movement will be reported immediately." John nodded in approval. The rural community had always been tight-knit, and now that unity would prove even more valuable. The neighbors, many of whom had known the family for generations, had become crucial allies in this silent watch. As preparations advanced, John spent more and more time with Storm. The two developed new communication patterns, subtle signals that only they understood. The horse learned to guide John through alternate routes on the property, avoiding exposed areas and staying close to points of protection. "It's incredible," Claire remarked one evening, watching father and horse return from their afternoon ride. "It's like they've developed their own language." "It's not just a language," Charles replied, his experienced gaze following the pair. "It's a complete partnership. John provides the strategy, and Storm offers the awareness he can't have. Together, they're stronger than any security system we could install." As night fell over Serene Hill, the family gathered for dinner. The meal passed in relative silence, each person lost in their own thoughts. Outside, Storm maintained his silent vigil, his sharp senses picking up every movement, every unusual sound. John, even without sight, could feel the tension in the air. But there was also something more, a growing determination, a strength that emanated from the unity of his family and the constant presence of his loyal companion. Whatever was coming, they would be ready. The morning began with a troubling discovery. Charles arrived at the ranch earlier than usual, bringing with him information that would shed new light on the situation. "John, we need to talk," he said, his voice filled with urgency. "I've found out something about our mysterious visitor." The family gathered in the living room, where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee by Anna couldn't dispel the tension in the air. Claire and Matthew sat close to their father, while Charles spread some documents across the coffee table. "The man who introduced himself as Richard Miller," Charles began, "is actually named Victor Adams. He's not a horse trader. He's a former animal trainer for special operations, dismissed from service for questionable conduct." John leaned slightly forward in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests. "What kind of questionable conduct?" "He developed unconventional training methods," Charles explained, choosing his words carefully. "He was removed after reports of unethical practices with the animals. But the most important thing is, Victor worked at the same training center where Storm was prepared." A sharp whinny cut through the air, as if the horse itself recognized the significance of that information. Anna brought her hands to her mouth, stifling a gasp of surprise. "So it's not a coincidence," John concluded. "He knows exactly who Storm is and what he can do." "Exactly," Charles confirmed. "Storm isn't just a well-trained horse. He's considered one of the finest specimens ever prepared for special operations. His ability to assess risk and respond to complex situations is unmatched." Claire, who had been reviewing her recent photographs, interjected, "That explains why he was so interested in special horses. But why now? Why here?" "Because Serene Hill is the perfect place," Matthew replied, his analytical mind connecting the dots. Secluded, with multiple access routes far from urban centers, John stood abruptly, walking confidently to the window. Years of adapting to blindness and months of living with Storm had given him a new way of perceiving the space around him. "He's not just interested in Storm," John declared, his voice carrying a grim certainty. The ranch is part of the plan. An isolated place with a blind owner and a seemingly vulnerable family? Charles nodded gravely. Victor has connections with groups that seek remote locations for their operations. Serene Hill would be perfect, isolated enough not to draw attention, yet close enough to strategic routes. Anna, who had remained silent, finally spoke up. And Storm would be a bonus, a valuable animal that could be used in their operations. But they didn't account for one thing, interrupted Claire, a glint of determination in her eyes. They didn't understand that Storm isn't just a trained horse. He's part of our family now. As if responding to Claire's statement, a new neigh from Storm was heard, this time stronger, more assertive. John smiled, recognizing the sound of determination in his companion. Victor made a miscalculation, said John, his voice steady. He saw an isolated family and a blind owner as easy targets. He didn't realize that my lack of vision has made me stronger in other ways. He didn't understand that Storm isn't just my eyes. He's my connection to a world many don't even know exists. Charles stood up, gathering the documents. We need to act fast. Victor isn't the type to give up easily. If he's already identified Serene Hill as a target, he probably already has a plan in motion. And we'll have our, replied John, his voice carrying the same determination from the days when he led his business empire. Storm has given us clear signs over the past few weeks. Now we know why. It's time to show them they've chosen the wrong place and the wrong people to threaten. The family spent the next few hours strategizing. Claire organized all the photographic evidence, Matthew reinforced the security systems, and Anna contacted trusted neighbors, establishing a support network. By dusk, John took his usual ride with Storm, but this time with a different purpose. Every step of the horse, every reaction, every sign was carefully recorded in his mind. The bond between them, already extraordinary, seemed to grow even stronger, with the knowledge of the imminent danger. The following days at Serene Hill passed with apparent normalcy, but it was a calm laced with tension, like the heavy air before a storm. The family maintained their routine, but every move was calculated, every decision weighed with extra care. John and Storm intensified their training, developing new communication codes. The businessman, who had previously led complex negotiations, was now applying his strategic experience in a completely new way. It's fascinating, Claire remarked one morning, watching her father and the horse perform a series of exercises in the field. You two look like you're dancing together, every movement perfectly synchronized. John smiled, his hands gently stroking Storm's neck. It's not dancing, my dear. It's trust. Storm knows exactly what I need, and I've learned to understand every signal he gives me. Anna, watching from the porch, couldn't help but marvel at her husband's transformation. Adversity, instead of breaking him, had revealed an even greater strength in John. His blindness, which initially seemed like an insurmountable limitation, now appeared almost as an advantage. It had sharpened his other senses in a way few could comprehend. Dad, called Matthew, approaching with a tablet in hand, I've finished mapping all the strategic points on the ranch. Every sensor, every camera, every access route is documented. But there's something interesting I noticed. John tilted his head, showing his attention. Storm, as if understanding the importance of the conversation, remained perfectly still. The routes you and Storm have been using these past few days, Matthew continued, form a pattern. You're naturally avoiding the most vulnerable points on the property, choosing paths that offer better protection and visibility. Not surprising, interjected Charles, who had just arrived for his daily visit. Storm was trained to assess terrain and identify strategic points. He's doing exactly what he was prepared to do, protect his partner. As the afternoon progressed, Anna noticed something different in the behavior of the ranch dogs. The animals, usually active and playful, were unusually quiet, gathered near the stable where Storm rested. Something's wrong, she murmured, catching Claire's attention as she photographed the sunset. Clara lowered her camera, observing the scene carefully. The dogs kept their ears perked, completely alert, as if sensing something beyond human perception. Storm in his stable also showed signs of restlessness. John, called Anna, her voice controlled but urgent, I think we need to double our attention tonight. John, who had developed an extraordinary sensitivity to changes in the environment, had already noticed the shift in the atmosphere. The air seemed denser, charged with an almost palpable tension. "Charles," he called, "how long until nightfall?" "Less than an hour," replied the former police officer, checking his watch. "Do you want me to stay tonight?" John pondered for a moment, his hands automatically stroking Storm's neck as the horse quietly approached. "Yes, but not here in the house. There's a perfect lookout spot in the old barn. From there, you'll have a clear view of the entire property." Matthew quickly adjusted his security systems, redirecting cameras and tweaking sensors to cover areas that had previously seemed less critical. Claire organized her recent photographs, searching for any detail that might have gone unnoticed. Anna prepared dinner as usual, but everyone noticed that she kept the curtains closed, something she rarely did. The meal proceeded in tense silence, each family member immersed in their own thoughts. "Storm is different today," observed John, his heightened sensitivity picking up on the slightest changes in the animal's behavior. "More alert, more focused. It's as if he knows." "He knows," interrupted Charles, his voice heavy with years of experience. "Animals like him have a perception that goes beyond our understanding. If Storm is like this, we should prepare." Night fell over Serene Hill like a heavy blanket. The house lights were strategically turned on, creating zones of shadow where there had once been light and illuminating areas that usually remained dark. A subtle but significant reversal. John, seated in his favorite armchair, kept one hand on the armrest, his fingers lightly drumming, an old habit from tense negotiations. From the stable came the rhythmic sound of Storm's hooves, a code only. John fully understood. "It's starting," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. "The real storm is coming." The silence of the night was broken by the distant sound of engines. Anna, who was in the kitchen finishing putting away the dinner dishes, froze mid-motion. The noise was different from the usual tractors and pickup. Trucks in the area, sharper, more aggressive. "Motorcycles," whispered Matthew, who was monitoring the security cameras on his tablet. "At least 3, maybe 4. They're keeping their headlights off." John, seated in his armchair in the living room, remained extraordinarily calm. Years of tense negotiations had taught him that panic was the worst advisor in times of crisis. His ears, sharpened by the lack of sight, picked up every sonic nuance. "Claire," he called in a controlled voice, "do you have your camera?" "Yes, Dad," she replied, already strategically positioned near the side window, shielded by the darkness of the room. "Good. We need to record everything. Matthew, how are the sensors?" "All active," the young man replied. "Charles is positioned in the barn with a clear view of the main entrance. The neighbors have been alerted. They're ready to act if necessary." The sound of the engines faded until it ceased completely, replaced by the almost imperceptible noise of footsteps on the packed dirt. Anna closed the last window, completing the security protocol they had established. In the stable, Storm began his silent communication with John. The pattern of his hoofbeats on the ground was different tonight, more urgent, more precise. John tilted his head, focused on deciphering each signal. "They're splitting up," he murmured, interpreting Storm's warnings. "Surrounding the property." As if confirming his analysis, the sensors began to trigger at different points along the perimeter. Matthew watched the notifications on his tablet, mentally mapping the intruder's movements. 4 points of approach, he reported. They're using the shadows of the trees as cover. John rose from his armchair with the dignity of someone preparing for an important meeting, not a confrontation. "Anna, you and the kids know what to do. Follow the plan exactly as we agreed." "Dad, I won't leave you here," protested Claire, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm not alone," John replied with a confident smile. "I have Storm with me, and you have a more important role to play." Anna briefly hugged her husband, her hands shaking, but her voice steady. "Be careful." John walked confidently to the back door, his precise steps showing how well he had adapted to the space. The sound of Storm's hooves changed again. Now they were rhythmic beats like a countdown. "They've cut the power," announced Matthew as the lights flickered and went out. But John smiled. The darkness, his constant companion for months, had now become his ally. While the others would need time to adjust their eyes to the lack of light, he was already in his element. "Now," he commanded. Anna, Claire, and Matthew moved silently to their designated positions, each carrying a vital part of the plan. In the barn, Charles kept his vigil, communicating through discreet signals with neighbors strategically positioned on adjacent properties. John crossed the backyard with the confidence of someone who could see perfectly in the dark. His steps led him directly to Storm, who waited anxiously. The horse, trained for special operations, understood the gravity of the situation perfectly. "It's time, my friend," murmured John, his hand automatically finding the animal's neck. "We'll show them they picked the wrong target." The sound of branches snapping in the darkness signaled that the intruders were approaching the house. They expected to find an unprepared family, a vulnerable blind man, an easy target. But what they would find would be something entirely different. Storm neighed softly, a sound that carried a clear message to John. They were ready. The bond between man and animal, forged through months of mutual trust and deep understanding, had never been stronger than at that moment. The intruders didn't know it, but they were about to discover that true strength lies not in sight, but in the ability to see beyond appearances. And that night, in the darkness of Serene Hill, that lesson would be taught in the most surprising way possible. If this story intrigued you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from, and let's continue. The intruders' first move was met with an unexpected response. When they tried to approach the main house, they encountered a maze of strategically placed obstacles, the result of weeks of meticulous planning between John and Storm. "They're confused," Matthew whispered over the radio, watching through the night vision cameras he had installed. "They can't figure out the pattern of the terrain." John, mounted on Storm, smiled in the darkness. During their daily rides, they had mapped every inch of the property, creating routes and barriers that only the two of them knew perfectly. John's lack of vision, which might have seemed like a disadvantage, was now his greatest asset. 4 of them, Charles reported from the barn. "They are trying to regroup near the orchard." Victor Adams, the man who had introduced himself as Richard Miller, led the group. His voice cut through the night with authority. "Split up! Don't let them leave the property!" What Victor didn't realize was that every move his group made was being carefully monitored. Claire, shielded by the darkness, recorded everything. With her night vision camera, Anna coordinated communication with the neighbors through a silent radio system, ensuring every adjacent property was on alert. Storm moved silently through the darkness, his hooves muffled by the tall grass John had intentionally let grow in certain areas. The horse and his rider were like a single entity, moving in perfect sync. "They're approaching the south stable," Matthew reported. John stroked Storm's neck, feeling the tension in the animal's muscles. "Let's show them what happens when they underestimate the darkness," he murmured. The plan began to unfold like a perfectly rehearsed choreography. Storm emerged from the shadows at strategic points, his imposing presence startling the intruders. The horse, using his special training, created distraction and confusion, appearing and disappearing in the darkness like a ghost. "What's going on?" One of the men's voices betrayed nervousness. "They seem to be everywhere." Victor tried to maintain control of the situation, but his frustration was evident. The plan that had seemed so simple, subduing an isolated family and a blind owner, was quickly turning into a tactical nightmare. John and Storm moved as if dancing in the darkness. Every step, every change of direction was executed with pinpoint precision. The intruders, reliant on sight and disoriented by the darkness, were unconsciously guided into increasingly vulnerable positions. "Now," commanded John. As if responding to an invisible signal, the strategically placed lights around the property lit up simultaneously. The backup lighting system, powered by independent generators, created a pattern of light and shadow that left the intruders completely exposed. Storm emerged majestically from a shaded area, John mounted on his back with the elegant posture. That characterized him. The businessman everyone had judged vulnerable due to his blindness now stood as an imposing figure, perfectly at ease in the darkness that so terrified the others. "Impressive, Victor," declared John, his voice carrying the authority of the days when he commanded his business empire. Or should I say former trainer Adams? Victor froze upon hearing his real name. His plan had relied on the element of surprise, on the expected vulnerability of his victims. Instead, he found himself surrounded, exposed, and at a complete disadvantage. "How?" he began, but was interrupted by the sound of approaching engines. "Ah, those must be our neighbors arriving," John commented casually. "You know, Victor, you made a basic mistake in the business world. You didn't do your research properly. You thought you'd find easy prey, but you discovered that darkness isn't always your ally." Storm moved in a perfect circle, his hooves marking a precise rhythm on the ground. It was a display of strength and control that didn't go unnoticed by Victor, who knew the animal's capabilities well. "This is your only chance," John continued, his voice now carrying a steely edge. "Your men are surrounded, your escape routes blocked, and every move you've made has been documented. The choice is now yours. Leave peacefully, or find out what to. It's like to face someone who has turned darkness into their greatest strength." The siege at Serene Hill was reaching its decisive moment. Victor Adams, confronted with the reality of his failed plan, watched in stunned silence as what was supposed to be a simple operation turned into an impressive display of strategy and preparation. "Impossible," he murmured, his voice betraying his confusion. "How did you know?" John, still mounted on Storm, maintained a serene posture that contrasted with the tension of the moment. "You forgot the first rule of the business world, Victor. Never underestimate your opponent, especially when they have loyal allies." As if responding to an invisible signal, the lights of the neighboring properties began to turn on one by one, revealing a circle of support that extended far beyond the boundaries of Serene Hill. The sound of approaching vehicles echoed from different directions, closing off any possible escape route. "Your men have already been identified," John continued, his voice calm but firm. "Claire recorded every move you made with night vision equipment. Matthew mapped every step through our sensors. The neighbors have all the entrances and exits under surveillance." Storm took a few steps forward, his imposing presence a silent reminder of Victor's miscalculation. The horse he had coveted so much wasn't just a valuable animal. It was the living symbol of the transformation of apparent fragility into extraordinary strength. "You thought you'd find an isolated and vulnerable family," John went on. "A blind businessman removed from his world would be easy prey. But do you know what you really found, Victor? A united community. People who understood that true strength lies in unity, not in intimidation." Anna emerged from the house at that moment, accompanied by Charles. Her posture was firm, her eyes shining with a mix of relief and determination. "The authorities are on their way," she announced, her clear voice cutting through the night. "All access points are blocked." Victor's accomplices began to show clear signs of nervousness. The plan that had seemed so secure was crumbling before their eyes. The darkness that was supposed to be their ally had turned into their prison. "So you have two options," declared Charles, his experience as a former police officer evident in his stance. "You can surrender peacefully now, or you can try to resist and face much more serious consequences." John tilted his head slightly, a gesture that had become his trademark since losing his sight. "You know, Victor, when I lost my vision, I thought I had lost everything. But I discovered something extraordinary. Sometimes we need to lose something to see what truly matters." Storm whinnied softly, as if endorsing his rider's words. The sound echoed across the property, carrying a clear message of strength and determination. "This ranch," John continued, his voice now carrying a note of pride, "isn't just a piece of land. It's a symbol of new beginnings, of adaptation, of overcoming. Every person here, every neighbor who answered our call, every friend who stood by our side, they're all part of something greater." The lights of police cars began to appear on the main road, their beams cutting through the darkness like luminous reminders of the inevitability of the situation. Victor watched powerless as his meticulous plan unraveled before his eyes. "True vision, Victor," John concluded. doesn't depend on the eyes. It depends on the ability to see beyond appearances, to build connections, to trust and be worthy of trust. Storm taught me that. This community taught me that. And now you've also learned this lesson. Claire, who had documented every moment with her camera, captured the exact instant when Victor's resistance finally broke. The image of the man who had arrived with so much arrogance, now confronted by the strength of a united community, would stand as a powerful testament to the true meaning of strength and courage. The night that should have been filled with terror had turned into an impressive demonstration of how true strength is born not from intimidation, but from unity, strategy, and the ability to turn apparent weaknesses into extraordinary advantages. The sun rose over Serene Hill, revealing a property transformed not only by the chaos of the previous night, but by the profound significance of the events that had unfolded there. The first light of morning found John and Storm still awake, standing, guard-like silent sentinels of their territory. "Dad," Claire called, approaching with a steaming cup of coffee, "you need to rest a little." John smiled, accepting the offered drink. The familiar aroma of morning coffee brought with it a sense of normalcy that contrasted with the intensity of the previous hours. "You know, Claire, for the first time in a long while I feel like I can truly rest." The activity on the property gradually returned to normal. The neighbors who had formed a protective circle during the night began to return to their homes, each carrying with them a new understanding of the meaning of community. Anna watched the scene from the porch, her heart overflowing with pride and gratitude. The house she had so feared would become a prison, for John had instead become the stage for his greatest victory. "It's amazing," Matthew commented, turning off his monitoring equipment, "how all of Storm's training perfectly complemented your skills, Dad. It's like you were made for each other." Charles, who had stayed to help with the final details, approached the group. "It's no coincidence," he said, a satisfied smile on his face. "When I brought Storm here, I knew you two would complement each other perfectly." John needed to rediscover his strength, and Storm needed someone who truly understood him. The horse, as if understanding they were talking about him, approached the group, his hooves marking a gentle rhythm on the dew-covered grass. John reached out, automatically finding the animal's neck, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "You know what's most impressive," Claire reflected, reviewing the photos she had taken during the night. "How you turned every apparent disadvantage into a strength. The darkness, the isolation of the ranch, even your lack of vision, Dad, it all became part of a greater strategy." John nodded thoughtfully. "Life has an interesting way of teaching us its lessons. When I lost my sight, I thought I was losing my independence, my strength. But in reality, I was just beginning to see in a different way." Anna moved closer to her husband, linking her arm with his. "And it wasn't just you who learned to see differently. We all changed. This ranch, which seemed like an exile, became our true home." "Serene Hill," murmured John, savoring each syllable of the name, "has always been more than just a property. My grandfather used to say this land had a soul of its own. Now I understand what he meant." Storm neighed softly, as if agreeing with his rider's words. The sound echoed across the property, blending with the birdsong announcing the new day. "And what happens now?" asked Matthew, always practical in his concerns. John smiled, a smile that carried the serenity of someone who had finally found their place in the world. "Now, my son, we begin a new chapter. Serene Hill won't just be our home, it will be a symbol of transformation." "How so, Dad?" inquired Claire, intrigued. "I've thought a lot about this during our rides," John explained. "This ranch, Storm, our experience, all of it can help others. People who, like me, need to rediscover their strength after facing seemingly insurmountable challenges." Charles nodded, understanding immediately. "A rehabilitation and training center." "More than that," replied John, his voice carrying the same determined tone from the days when he ran his business empire. "A place where people can learn that their apparent limitations can become their greatest strengths. Where they can discover, as I did, that sometimes we need to lose something to gain so much more." Anna gently squeezed her husband's arm, moved. "It's perfect, John, absolutely perfect." The sun was already high in the sky, bathing Serene Hill in its golden light. The property, which hours earlier had been the scene of a tense confrontation, now seemed to breathe a new energy, as if it, too, were ready for its next transformation. 6 months had passed since the night that definitively changed the fate of Serene Hill. The ranch, which once served as a refuge for a businessman who had lost his sight, now pulsed with a new energy and purpose. The old barn had been transformed into a modern training center, where people facing different challenges found strength and inspiration through contact with horses. John, with his unique experience, had become a natural mentor for those who arrived carrying their own stories of overcoming adversity. "It's amazing to see how this place has changed," Claire remarked one morning, photographing a group of visitors participating in an equine therapy session. Every corner of the ranch now has a greater purpose. John, mounted on Storm as usual, smiled as he heard the sound of lively voices coming from the arena. "The real transformation, my dear, happens within people. The ranch simply provides the space for them to rediscover their own strength." Anna had taken over the coordination of the welcoming program, turning the main house into a warm environment where families could gather and share their experiences. The porch, which once witnessed moments of apprehension, now echoed with laughter and hopeful conversations. "I know what's most impressive," reflected Matthew, who had developed an adapted monitoring system to ensure the safety of all visitors. "How everyone who passes through here takes a bit of Serene Hill's energy with them." Charles, who now devoted much of his time to the project, coordinated a special training program with other horses, using Storm's experience as a model. "Every animal has a special gift," he explained to the new instructors. "Our mission is to help them develop that potential to benefit those who need it most." One particularly significant morning brought an exciting surprise. A young athlete, who had lost the use of her legs in an accident, was able, for the first time since her recovery, to experience the feeling of freedom while riding one of the horses trained by Charles. "It's like I have wings again," she declared, tears of joy streaming down her face as she stroked the animal's neck. John, who was observing the session, felt his heart fill with profound joy. "That's how I felt the first time I rode Storm," he shared with the young woman. "I discovered that our limitations are just the beginning of a new journey." The fame of Serene Hill began to spread. People from different parts of the country started seeking out the ranch, each carrying their own stories of challenges and hopes. John and his family developed a structured program that combined equine-assisted therapy, meditation, and activities that stimulated the development of new senses and skills. "It's as if the ranch has found its true calling," Anna observed one evening as the family gathered for dinner. "Every person who comes here adds something special to our story." Claire, who had begun documenting the transformations through her photography, created a permanent exhibition in the old barn. The images captured moments of discovery, overcoming, and joy, telling silent stories of personal transformation. "Each photograph is a testament," she explained to visitors, "not just to the physical changes, but to the internal transformations that happen here." Storm, as always, maintained his majestic and protective presence. The horse that was once trained for special operations now led a group of animals dedicated to an even nobler mission, helping people rediscover their inner strength. John developed a unique methodology based on his own experience of overcoming. True strength, he taught new participants, isn't about overcoming limitations, but about transforming them into new possibilities. The neighbors who had come together on that decisive night continued to be a fundamental part of the project. The rural community, once scattered, now regularly gathered to support the ranch's activities and celebrate each small victory of the participants. "Serene Hill has become more than a ranch," Charles reflected during one of the team meetings. "It's a symbol of hope, a reminder that our greatest adversities can turn into our greatest blessings." And so, day after day, the ranch continued its own transformation. Each dawn brought new stories, new challenges, and new opportunities to transform lives. John, guided by Storm and supported by his family, had finally found a greater purpose than any business empire could offer. On a golden autumn afternoon, exactly 1 year after the events that transformed Serene Hill, The ranch prepared for a special celebration. The first anniversary of the Serene Hill Rehabilitation and Personal Development Center brought together people from all over the country, each carrying their own story of transformation. John, as always accompanied by Storm, walked through the property, feeling the lively buzz of preparations. The sound of laughter and cheerful conversations filled the air, mingling with the neighing of horses and the singing of birds. "It's amazing how much has changed in just a year," commented Anna, approaching her husband with a group of visitors. "Remember how apprehensive we were when we first arrived here?" John smiled, reaching out to touch his wife's face. "Every challenge brought us to this moment. Every obstacle showed us a new path." Claire had organized a special photo exhibition for the occasion. The images, arranged chronologically, told not only the story of Serene Hill, but also of every person who had found hope and renewal there. "This is my favorite," she said, describing a particular photograph to her father. "It's you and Storm on the first day you managed to complete the ranch's circuit together. There's something magical about how the sunlight falls on both of you." Matthew, who had turned his interest in technology into an innovative project, was presenting the new accessibility system he had developed for the ranch to the visitors. Every sensor, every device was designed to create an environment where everyone can move safely and independently, he explained proudly. Charles, observing everything with satisfaction, joined the group of instructors who now formed the permanent team at the center. "When I brought Storm here," he shared, "I knew something special would happen. But this," he gestured to all the activity around them, "this has exceeded all expectations." During the celebration, stories were shared, tears of joy were shed, and new dreams were nurtured. A young ballerina who had lost mobility in her legs performed a special routine mounted on her horse, moving with a grace that defied any physical limitation. "It was here that I learned that dance doesn't need legs," she declared, emotional. "It just needs a heart open to new possibilities." John, listening to her testimony, felt his own heart fill with gratitude. Storm, by his side, maintained that serene and protective presence that defined him, as if he too understood the magnitude of the moment. "You know what moves me the most?" John commented to his gathered family. "It's seeing how everyone who passes through Serene Hill ends up finding their own storm, that inner strength that transforms limitations into possibilities." Anna, who now coordinated a support program for families, shared her own observation. "Every story that comes here is unique, but they all have something in common: the discovery that our greatest weaknesses can become our greatest strengths." The celebration lasted until dusk, when everyone gathered in the large courtyard for a special moment. John, mounted on Storm, addressed the crowd with the same eloquence he had once used in his business meetings. "Serene Hill," he began, his voice filled with restrained emotion, "was born out of one man's need to find his place in the world after losing his sight, but it grew to become so much more than that. Today, this ranch is a living testament that there are no limitations capable of containing the human spirit when it finds its true purpose." Claire captured the moment, as the sun set behind her father and the horse, creating an image that would become a symbol of Serene Hill's legacy. The silhouette of a man who, even without the ability to see with his eyes, had learned to see with his heart, mounted on a horse that had transformed its physical strength into an instrument of healing and hope. The day ended with a sense of fulfillment that went beyond personal achievements. Serene Hill had become a beacon of hope, a place where limitations turned into possibilities, and where each person could discover their own inner strength. The sun rose once more over Serene Hill, its first rays painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. John, as had become his custom, was already up, accompanied by his faithful Storm. The horse, now with a few silver strands in its black coat, maintained the same majestic posture that characterized it. "Look, Dad," called Claire, approaching with her camera. "The new foals are starting their training today." In the main arena, a group of young horses began their journey under the watchful supervision of Charles. Each animal had been carefully selected for its sensitivity and ability to connect with humans, following the extraordinary example of Storm. "It's incredible to think," reflected Matthew, joining the family, "that it all started with an unexpected gift and a situation that seemed impossible to overcome." Anna, who was organizing preparations to welcome a new group of participants, smiled as she watched her husband. John was no longer just the businessman who had lost his sight. He was a living symbol of transformation and hope for hundreds of people who passed through Serene Hill. "Every story that comes here," she commented, "reminds me of our own journey, how we turned our fear into strength, our uncertainty into purpose." The rehabilitation center had expanded in ways no one could have predicted. Beyond the work with horses, it now offered comprehensive personal development programs, innovative therapies, and courses that helped people discover their own hidden strengths. "You know what's most special?" said John, his voice carrying that serene wisdom that had become his trademark. "Every person who passes through here takes a part of our story with them, but also leaves their own mark on Serene Hill." Storm neighed, softly as if in agreement. The horse, once trained for special operations, had become a master of his own mission, helping people overcome their limits and fears. Claire, reviewing some of her latest photographs, shared a touching observation. "Every image I capture here tells a story of transformation. It's as if Serene Hill has the magical power to bring out the best in every person who crosses its gates." "It's not magic," John gently corrected, stroking Storm's neck. "It's the understanding that our greatest limitations can become our greatest gifts when we learn to see them through different eyes." At that moment, the sound of approaching vehicles announced the arrival of a new group of participants, families full of hope and determination, each carrying their own story of challenges and dreams. "It's time," said John, mounting Storm with his usual elegance. "Time to show more people that the impossible is just the beginning of a new journey." As he rode toward the newcomers, John reflected on how his own story had transformed. The darkness that once seemed like his greatest challenge had become the path to his greatest fulfillment. Serene Hill pulsed with life and purpose. The sound of horses' hooves on the packed earth, the lively voices of the participants, the gentle wind through the trees, all blended into a symphony of hope and renewal. "Welcome to Serene Hill," John announced, his voice carrying the quiet strength of someone who had found their true path. "Here you'll discover that every limit is just the start of a new possibility." And so, under the morning sun, another chapter began in the endless story of Serene Hill, a place where darkness turned into light, where limitations became possibilities, and where every person could discover their own extraordinary strength. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit like. Tell us which city you're watching from and stay tuned.